Yep. Are we ready?
Yes.
Good morning. What a crowd. This seems like a Northern Trust staff meeting here.
Exactly. It's not mandatory, but it is nice to see you.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 138th session of the Faith at Work Ministry in the Church of the Holy Spirit in Lake Forest. Wonderful in-person crowd. Also even a bigger audience on Zoom and watching it virtually. So great to have you here. As I said, this is the 138th session since we started back in 2007. Mike and I had a little coffee this morning. I told him this is such a wonderful opportunity to have a front row seat to 138 faith journeys, all very unique, people from all different backgrounds, if you will. The one thing that's common is God does His work through many people in many different professions. But before starting, as we normally do, we start normally with prayer. So, Father Luke.
God does His work through time, too. So this is a prayer for us to love with divine affluence. In the 15th century, the English language adopted a Latin theological word, affluence. And it meant the flow of God's graciousness from heaven to earth. Let us pray. Creator of the creation, you continue the flow of graciousness from heaven to earth. Awaken our human sensitivity and awareness of your grace surrounding us on every side, a sensitivity that may dim or even disappear. As we move and grow, as we serve and love through our faith at work, may we restore the original meaning of affluence. May your servant Mike O'Grady and all of us continue to be a visible sign of God's invisible but tangible abundant grace, so that all may seek ye first the kingdom of God. Amen.
Thank you, Father Luke. Before starting our discussion, just a quick background. In those sessions, we normally do three things. Discuss the person's life story, if you will, their background. Second, their faith journey. And thirdly, very important, how do you bring faith to work? So there's three basic principles. We never stick to some of the questions we prepare in advance. It always flows very naturally. We'll go for about 40 minutes. In the last 20 minutes will be Q&A from this group. And if I'm looking at my phone, I'm not checking emails. This is we're getting questions from the audiences, if you will. As I said, we've had all different speakers over the last number of years. This is, I think, the 27th time we've had a chief executive. We've had social workers, principals, headmaster, chief medical officers, just released prisoner. We've had people from different faiths. But it's always the same themes, if you will. And I'm just so excited to have Michael Grady here this morning. Rick Waddell spoke here in 2012, so this is the first time we have two CEOs from the same company. He was fabulous, and I'm sure, Mike, and I know you'll be fabulous as well. Most of you being Northern Trust employees here, you know Michael, but just very quickly from his background, he grew up in Ohio, Columbus and Cincinnati, proud graduate from the University of Notre Dame, also proud graduate from the Harvard Business School. He joined Northern Trust in 2011, three pretty big promotions before becoming the CEO in 2018, and a chairman and CEO in 2019. Above and beyond his many professional accomplishments, what I was really impressed is his charitable work, whether that's in not-for-profits, I've been also community organizations. Among the many are a number of museums, including the Field Museum, the local Catholic charities, but also the National Catholic Extension. He was in the Finance Council of the Archdiocese of Chicago. He was in a commercial club, just promoted, just elevated to be a chairman. He's also in the Fed Reserve. So if you guys want to ask any questions in the interest rates and prospects, feel free to ask. He's
That's
also
why I have my colleagues here.
also one of the trustees at Notre Dame, and also the Northwestern Medical Group. So again, without much more, and obviously very proud husband of Claire and their kids. We're going to discuss that. So without much more ado, let's welcome Michael Grady.
Well, I do want to say thank you, Mike, for inviting me to join you this morning, and I feel fortunate to have the relationship that we do. I had heard so much about Mike from others before I had the chance to meet him and know how influential you've been in the lives of many people. I also want to thank Father Luke for having me, but also for having a group like this. As you mentioned, I am involved with the Archdiocese of Chicago, and we know how important it is to have vibrant communities, vibrant parishes, and clearly what you're doing here is differentiated and strong. You can just sense it when you walk into the building. So thank you.
This is a wonderful church. I've always proudly wear either a U.S. flag. I wear this pin, which is the pin for the Church of the Holy Spirit. Again, very appropriate for our discussion today. But I have at least 25 questions. We're probably going to cover only 7 of them. But maybe to start first with your early life. You grew up, your family, your education, and
Sure.
maybe your professional background.
Sure. So again, great to be here, and I appreciate you coming as well. And when Mike said to me, kind of, here are the 3 categories that we cover, and we can cover them in that order. And in thinking it through, for me at least, they all blend together. And so I said probably the easiest way for me to speak about it is through time, because all of those things kind of intertwine kind of throughout my life. But starting off, and I would say I've been incredibly blessed in my life, and I understand that when I speak through it. My dad, George O'Grady, was from Chicago, grew up in Rogers Park. Irish Catholic family, one of 8 boys, a little bungalow house down on Ridge and Toohey, still there if you want to go by, and you can marvel at how did they get 10 people, and actually, and my great-grandmother, so how did they get them all into this little place? So lots of crazy stories from that. But my dad was the 7th of 8. He went to DePaul. That's a whole nother story as to how my grandfather was able to, I'll say get him in, because he could not afford to pay for all those boys to go, and they didn't all go, but literally got a 4-for-1 deal because he knew one of the priests at DePaul.
What a great school that is.
Oh,
DePaul.
Fantastic. And again, I could speak so much about so many topics, but DePaul, changed my dad's life. But like I said, it was, 4 boys who, and with my dad being one of the younger, a number of them, including my dad, had served in the military. So some of this was like coming back from service, and it's like, what am I going to do? And so in being able to, have them go to DePaul, just again changed their lives. And I just real quick on that, you mentioned some of the organizations I'm involved with, but my wife Claire, who's also very involved in things, is on the board at DePaul, and just I believe in the mission of Notre Dame so much, as you would expect, but equally I do with what DePaul is doing. So my dad went to DePaul, moved to Cincinnati for his job with Fireman's Fund Insurance. So he was an underwriter, and in Cincinnati met my mother, which is Maggie O'Grady, or was Maggie Post at the time. So her family, kind of Dutch, German, and Irish. My grandmother's name was Kylie. So they met there, and after a couple years, they moved. After they had been there a few years, but have an older brother. Then after I was born, we moved to Columbus, Ohio. So that's where I grew up, and I have a sister as well. And my mom, there's many influential people in my life, but it does start with my mom, because she, and particularly I would say with regard to my faith and who I am as a person. I couldn't have been, luckier with my father, but my mom was the driving force in the family. She spent 2 years.
Very typical, I think.
Yeah, right. She spent 2 years in the convent, and as a result, she was very religious. And it just was a matter of, for her, and she would tell us, she just realized after being there that that was not ultimately her vocation. So it's not that she stopped believing in Jesus or anything like that, or the mission. It was just she felt she had a different calling. And I will tell you one interesting story is my parents had passed away, but we were at the house, doing the old cleaning things up out of the basement, and we found journals from when she was in the convent.
Wow.
And so to actually read about what she was going through, and some of it was very, very practical, as to what they did each day, but you could read about her contemplation about her faith. I mean, this is somebody in the convent that was going to be completely devoted to doing that, and just questioning that, it was like getting inside of somebody's thinking. So they ended up getting married, which was obviously great. And I would say with my mom that she is the one that really laid the foundation for my values. And as you would expect, Christian, just core Christian values. Even though she didn't say these are the Christian values, it's just here's what it means to be, a good person. So things like discipline and faithfulness, generosity, humility, kindness, perseverance, being resilient, all of those types of core values. And I say that because they've basically been the same values the rest of my life. A lot of other things have changed in how they get interpreted, but that was kind of setting the foundation. And I would also add that my grandfather, her father, lived with us when I was growing up, and he was, the ultimate stoic, and in a very religious way as well. So I know a lot of other people grew up in Catholic households, but in addition to I'll say daily prayers, it was the rosary, and every night before I went to bed, my grandfather would bless us with holy water that he had sent from Lourdes. So it left a lasting impression, is what I would say. So very fortunate with the parents. Again, living in Columbus, Ohio. My dad was an insurance agent and was at a small insurance agency there in Columbus. And then I would say, as I, growing up, did all the things I'll say like kids do growing up, but I really enjoyed sports. If you didn't see us, I was walking up here. I'm above average height, let's just say. So I was attracted more to basketball. And again, just God has a way of putting people in your life. And my high school basketball coach just happened to be somebody who had a very accomplished career, and then decided instead of just completely retiring, he would move back to Columbus and coach a high school basketball team, at Bishop Watterson High School. And I say that he had been assistant coach at Ohio State during the Fred Taylor days, just meaning they'd won a national championship. He was the head coach at Kent State and the head coach at LSU. So this is like a big-time coach. Even with all of that, that's not why he was influential. It's that he was a strong believer in John Wooden. And so he was the person that, not only with me, but with others, kind of...
The pyramid of success is probably the best summary of leadership.
It's fantastic. And so for those that don't know about the pyramid of success, it's basically, it is a pyramid, 25 basically personal characteristics. And it's a combination of, as you would expect, personal characteristics or values that a person should pursue. And he used this, with his team. That was the whole idea. And then teamwork. And that was kind of the mortar, if you will, that went around the pyramid. And the reason why it resonated with me is because I talked about my mom. the one thing, I mean, many things, but that my mom like stamped on our head is your whole purpose in life is to be the best person you can be. Like, and that's it. Super simple. And I will tell you that it's like, well, that's simple, right? Because, you know, just, hey, do the best you can, that's good enough, right? But it is the ultimate paradox. Because on the one hand, it is, you know, be the best person you can be. But you also know that being the best person you can be, you really know you can always be better. And so it's a constant driver of, okay, you could have been better about this or better about that. And with John Wooden, his definition of success was success is the state of mind, or sorry, is peace of mind that you have self-satisfaction that you have done the best you could be based on who you are. And so it just basically the same thing. And what was helpful though, is I'll say like a kid growing up is, and anybody who knows John Wooden, it's like, okay, that all sounds good and flowery. Okay, he won 10 national championships. Okay, this guy was like hyper competitive. So it wasn't all like, oh, we're all nice and just give the ball to the other team. And I mean, this guy is like bite your arm off at the same time in many respects, which as a, you know, kid growing up who I felt it was like okay to be very competitive. And I would say, you know, for that portion of my life, so much of it was, okay, how do I become the best person I can be in everything? So whether it's sports or school, you know, that's okay. Do it within this framework, but that's what it's all about. And so, you know, all through there, and then ended up going to Notre Dame. And I would say all that time period, it was like within that framework.
You played basketball or track? I don't remember.
No, so I was I'll say like nice basketball player in high school. I probably thought I was better than I really was, you know, the way that goes. And, you know, there's many themes in my life, but one of them is, you know, being thankful for the people in my life and mentors and my parents who knew what was better for me than I knew myself. And two things about it. One is that they always thought more highly of me than I did myself, which was always helpful. But two is when it looked like I was going to do something that I don't want to say was like a bad decision, but maybe not optimal, they would push me in the right direction. And so as a high school basketball player, like that was everything to me. You know, the school and all was fine. And so I wanted to play, and I could play the equivalent like Division III in Ohio, which would be great, and I would still be able to play basketball. My parents, well, that's kind of interesting, you know, you're going to go to Notre Dame. I did not want to go. My brother was there. That was part of it. And I will say, for my parents, like sending, you know, their kids to Notre Dame was like the ultimate thing to be able to do. And by the way, and pay for, right? So my dad would always say, and anybody asks me about my investment portfolio, I tell them, you know, they're right over there, those 3 kids, because it was everything to be able to pay the tuition there. And so I went to Notre Dame. I was not going to play basketball at Notre Dame, and I'll say it's like a longer story, but the short answer is I ended up playing on the volleyball team for 3 years, another sport where being 6'5" does not hurt. So yeah, which was a great experience because back to this whole idea, it was like a self-improvement, competitive aspect that I could have in my life, in addition to, you know, the rest of school.
It's interesting what your mom was teaching. It almost sounds like the ideal fruit of the Spirit, if you will. Not exactly the same ones, but peace, love, and obviously self-control, faithfulness. So very, very good. Mike mentioned he was from Columbus. I said, you must love Ohio State and Notre Dame. No,
not exactly.
I'm going to let you answer.
I grew up an Ohio State fan, but, you know, as you can imagine, once you're baptized as a Notre Dame fan, like that's it's over. Imagine the national championship game this past year. That was it wasn't exactly a Grady Bowl, but it was fun.
So how did your faith evolve through college? Quite a few people take a quote-unquote sabbatical from faith
Yeah.
during the college years, and then how did it evolve through your professional life?
Yeah, so that's part of it, and part of why I say I feel so blessed in my life is because I've been put into situations where I have the opportunity and the support to be able to continue, with that life and that faith journey. And I'm just gonna say, like, being, whether it's, Christian or Catholic or spiritual at Notre Dame is probably the easiest place during that period of your life, okay? There's nobody there that forces you to do it. I mean, you don't have to pray, you don't have to go to church, you don't have to do any of that. But to the extent that that is something that's a part of you, it's easy in a good way. So the way that it really changed, though, is there, I think I probably went to church at the Basilica, the actual church, like one time in 4 years. You go to church in your dorm. So every dorm on campus, Catherine knows this, has a chapel in it. And so you're going, on, and the masses are often like at 10 o'clock at night on Sunday, but the different dorms have different times. You can go to a different dorm if you want. And the point is more about, I would say, like the community that you're in. And I'm not saying everybody in the dorm went to, to church or anything, but you're generally going to school or to mass with the other people in your dorm. And so it just seems like it's a part of your life. That's the real benefit. Is it's not well, I'm a Catholic over here, but then over here I'm a college student. It's like it's just a part of it. So of course, that stage of life, I'll say, you question things and go on that journey. But it was a lot easier to do that. And once again, my parents are, whether physically or just in my mind, were always there as well, and not wanting to, I'll say, disappoint them, and trying to become the person, the best person I could be.
Awesome. And maybe a few comments on your professional career and family.
Yeah, so I will, so family first, because that was, lots of important points in my life, but in college was like, I'm going to say the most important point in my life, which is I met my wife, Claire. But I did not meet her at Notre Dame. As it turns out, and again, God has a way, which is I was on a summer school program between junior and senior year over at Oxford in England, and Claire was on the same program. So we met over there, and when I say the rest is history, like between the two of us, it's like we've been together ever since. We've gone on the journey completely together, which has been the best, I would say. And then with Claire, just on that front, we have 3 daughters. So Rachel, Caroline, and Alexandra, which, as you can imagine, as every parent, I'm incredibly proud of each of them, and they're now, adults. I can't even say young adults anymore, but they're adults, 29, 27, and 24. So, and that's, again, the most important thing in my life would be my family. So that's on the family front, and that's another big part of your faith is what does it mean then to have this family, and trying to bring them along in their faith journey as well, and I knew it would be different, for example, for them than it was for me. Now, fortunately, they all did go to Notre Dame, so they went to Sacred Heart and then St. Ignatius and Notre Dame. And my only point on that is, and they could have gone anywhere and all, without a doubt. I mean, they all chose to go there. But back to the environment, I think it just makes it easier to be able to have that faith journey. And so that's worked out well for them. Professionally, after Notre Dame, I worked for Parish Hall for 3 years as an auditor in San Francisco, which is a great experience. As you mentioned, I went to business school, and then after business school, I worked for Merrill Lynch in investment banking, and for 19 years, which is a long time. And all of that, I would say, for the most part, Mike, was also in this framework of, being primarily focused on myself, and being the best person I could be. And I say that that's not, in fact, I would say not with, pride per se. Frankly, it's part of what I reflect on as being, too focused on myself. And over time, I've learned more about the importance of relationships and making sure that I'm, focused as much on those relationships as I am on just, doing what I want to do because it's a sense of accomplishment of doing that. And so that period of, life and raising a family and all was great. And then, without a doubt, a meaningful, once again, change in my life was going to Northern Trust, which...
How did that happen? I mean, how did you?
Yeah, and obviously Rick was here, and I'm still in Rick's shadow, which is okay. Even though I'm taller than him, I'm in his shadow, and Bill Osborne and a lot of other people as well. But people, they'll ask either like, oh, so what was your career plan or life plan? It's like, I never had one. And even if you said, today, if people ask me things like, oh, well, when are you going to retire or whatever, I have no idea. And it's just because, back to the way I was raised, my mom, it's like, God has a plan. Like, you don't need a plan. Now, of course, do your best and look ahead and, be prepared and all of those kind of things. But God has a plan, and you need to give it up to God on that and just do your best. So that's, I'll say, what I was doing. Certainly there were time periods where I don't want to say that I said, like, is this all there is? But I will say that I didn't feel like I was fully reaching my potential. I did feel like I could do more. There was just something, it's not to say that my life was, out of balance or something, but it was like, do I have other capabilities that I could use more? And I say that in the sense of, up to that point in my career, it was mostly about being what I'm going to call more of an individual contributor, right? Now you work on teams, but it was like investment banking teams and things like that, and led groups of investment bankers. But my point is, it was less about leadership. And when I joined Northern, the way it happened is Northern was a client of mine. So I'd worked with the company for about a decade, and so had relationships with a number of people like Dave Blowers and others at Northern, but also, Rick and Steve Fratkin and Bill Morrison, et cetera, because we were, doing things together. And I was having lunch with Rick, a lunch meeting, and this is 2011, and he said, Mike, have you ever thought about doing something else? And I said, no, I think this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And he said, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. So he had the rest of the meeting, and then at the end, as we were walking out, he said, I know you said you haven't thought about doing anything else, but if it was something here at Northern, would that be different? I said, that's completely different. I said, I have tremendous respect for Northern Trust and for the people at Northern Trust. So yes, I would be interested. He said, okay. And I thought, well, what is it? And he didn't say it. And then for like months, like, went on, and, nothing happened. So I thought, well, that was just an odd, like he was just kind of throwing it out there. And then he called me eventually and said, hey, we're going to be making some changes here. Would you be interested in throwing your hat in the ring to be the CFO for the company? And so I said, absolutely. And I tell people as well that as much as that was a blessing from a career work perspective, which we can talk about, it was a bigger blessing for my family and for me with regard to my family. And I say that because my job in investment banking, it was good, but it was a lot of flying all over the place. And actually I was leading a group that was in New York, so I was basically commuting, which was something that, just because it's a funny story. When I got this promotion, this is great. I come home, I tell Claire, this is when I'm at Merrill Lynch, and I say, guess what? I'm going to now lead the financial institutions group. She said, oh, that's great. Congratulations. That's fantastic. And I said, oh, I'm so glad that you're happy because, we need to move to New York now. She said, I'm not moving to New York, but if you want to go, that's fine. The girls and I are staying here because they're all in Sacred Heart and da-da-da-da-da-da. So I said, okay, well, so, again, trying to make sure that you have your priorities in life. We did agree, if that was ever not working out, she would just tell me, it's not working out. Because I'm going to go hard, we'll go hard at this. But then if she says, nope, it's out of line, then we'll do it. And so at one point she said, remember you said this, like, it's not working out. And I was in a, like I say, real personal, jam or conflict. Because, and I did say, I can quit and I will quit if that's what you're saying. And it was very straightforward, which is just, hey, we have these 3 young girls. They're just about to go into high school. And, maybe it worked before, to come home and drive them around on the weekends, whatever. That is not going to work. I need you here at night to help with the girls for a lot of reasons. I mean, the kids are different, whatnot, but for us, it was just, and that's more important. And I agreed. And so it was like, okay, just give me a little bit of time and see if, something, works
See if
out.
Rick calls back, huh?
Yeah, I'm not kidding. I mean, imagine. So, of course, when I told you the first time when Rick said that, are you, well, if it was here at Northern Trust, she's like, what'd you say? I said, yes. And she said, okay, great. And so what is it? And I said, I don't know. She's like, well, call him back. Ask him what it is. And I said, well, it doesn't work that way, honey. You got to kind of wait till. So it was a true blessing to then be able to be around, with the girls as they were going into St. Ignatius and everything that comes with, that stage of life. For them. But at Northern, it was a great opportunity to go into an organization like that I had so much respect for the organization itself, very principles driven, service, expertise, and integrity. And back to my mom, like one of those values was around service. And of course integrity, but service is like you are here to serve other people, like in life. And so to think about, here's a company that is, at the forefront, it fits perfectly. And so it was just a great opportunity to join. And then two, and I have so many Northern partners here, but anyway, the culture is one of tremendous respect, for each other. And you're always trying to struggle and get better and evolve the culture, but at the core, the way that people treat each other is the type of place that I wanted to be a part of.
Yeah, I love your 3 principles. You mentioned them: service, expertise, and integrity. Has been there for a long time. And actually, all 3 complement one another.
Absolutely.
You can be service-oriented, you can have integrity, but without a level of expertise, which brings it all together, makes it even more valuable to whoever your customers, clients, or if it's a not-for-profit. So anyway, you said it's a wonderful triangle.
That's why they've
value.
been around for 135 years plus.
Now, read someplace will stay around for another 135 years.
It will stay around. That's right. If I have anything to do with it, without a doubt. And that's because we do believe that's why the company was founded. As we say, by clients, for clients, and that's the best way to serve them and create value.
Yeah, not to make this a business interview, if you will, but I read last night you're a One Northern Trust emphasis, if you will, on the 3 things you're pursuing: optimizing growth, strengthening the resilience within the organization, and driving optimize or productivity. Those are 3 wonderful things. And obviously, you do those things well. You do control your destiny.
Yeah, you've made the pitch. That is it, right? Right. If you want to control your own destiny, you need to be a high-performing company. That's what high-performing companies do.
Now, there was one Motorola, one Ford, when Mullally went. GE didn't have to say that when I was in General Electric. Really, the comments were that whole concept of One Northern Trust, however many business units you have, to be able to make the sum greater than the individual, and again, to have that mindset is that it's a real wonderful image of what does it take to be successful in a multi-line company.
Yeah, it resonates. As always, there's good stories behind it. we had the strategy, if you will. We knew what we were going to do. This goes back a few years, but and we were going to roll this out to all of our partners. And it's the weekend before we're going to do that, and so I'm sitting at home at my desk and going to go through this. What am I going to say? And at the time, there was a different name for the strategy. I won't say what it was, but it was one of these that they came up with that was clever. I'll say, but I'm sitting there, I'm like, it just doesn't resonate, and we had steered away from one because, as you just said, there's one Ford, there's one Motorola, et cetera. But I just said, but that's what resonates, with our partners, with our clients, is deliver the entire firm, to the clients. Work together across the different groups. And so I called somebody else up. I said, it's just not resonating. What do you think about just going with One Northern Trust? And the person said, I'm so glad you called me. I'm like, well, why did you say this earlier? But
the comment really is, if you go there, it does tell you that something must not be there already. So once you go to that level of strategy, and then opportunity is obviously to be transparent, to admit what you need to get to. And then of course, is how do you follow through. Anyway, huge fan of your company, and we wish you really, really well. Maybe related question, do you view your career and profession as a calling or as a profession?
Definitely a calling. Definitely a calling. Okay. Yeah, and again, I think that's just because, growing up with my parents, that's the way they thought about things. Certainly they, talked about professions, do you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, that kind of thing. But because I think my mom had been in the convent, just the whole idea of you need to think about something bigger, and not knowing what that manifestation would be, what the role would be. It would just be, well, how can you be the best person, you could be?
Just two quick observations. The first one is that you said your mom had implemented the values in your head. Listening to you, I would say it's probably more even implanted those on your heart.
True.
You can think things through unless you have that passion and drive behind it. So she's obviously done a very good job on that front. In the second observation, Rick told me the same story a number of years ago, how you guys came to work together, but he did not mention the duration between the first and the second comment.
Yeah.
I think Rick is watching, so Rick, if you're watching, again, he was hoping to be here in person, but I do know he was looking forward to listening to this.
There's two things. One is that part of the story. The other thing Rick always says, which I agree with, is he'll tell people, he's like, Mike's okay, but we really wanted Claire, and I agree with him.
Yeah, she's very impressive. Obviously, faith it can have a political connotations, positive or negative. There's lots of pursuits of having the people bring the whole self to work. And religion can be a positive or negative, depends how implemented. Maybe just being a global organization, very diverse employees and customers. How do you balance, or how do you bring faith to work, and how do you balance the different interests that people may have, and for that to be viewed as a positive as opposed to being viewed as the opposite?
Yeah. So I would say the main thing is, for me, is in addition to trying to be the best person I can be, and always having that, I've also wanted to be what I consider an authentic person. And what I mean by authentic is, basically being true to your personality, your values, your spirit, despite whatever the pressures are to knock you off of that, and to have alignment in that. And what I mean by that is, you and I talked earlier, Mike, about the fact that, hey, we may want to, post the interview or whatever, do you have an issue with that? And other than saying, you need to run it by Kelly Menard first, because otherwise I'll get in trouble. But I said, no, I don't have a problem. And my point is, it's not, I wouldn't want it to be like, oh, I wouldn't want, a client to hear this, because I'm different when I go to work. They're going to hear something different. I'm a believer of kind of what goes around comes around, and so in the same way, I wouldn't want, if anybody here, if they talk to somebody who I went to high school with, they would say, well, that's not what O'Grady was like when he was growing up.
Yeah.
You know, he's a different person. I want to be, you know, the same person, I'll say, all the time. And, you know, I'll say it's not easy, but it's a lot easier if you do think about it that way. And so when, you know, people talk about either bringing their whole self to work or faith at work, I mean, I just bring myself to work. I just try to be the person that I am. The other aspect I would say is around leadership. As I talked about, you know, most of my career was more focused on, I'll say, me and doing that. And leadership, you know, is that, you know, plus more. And that has been challenging for me, but in a good way. Mm-hmm. Just meaning a lot of the aspects of leadership don't necessarily come easily to me. But back to this idea of, like, if you want to be the best leader, then you need to force yourself to do that. You know, as much as I'm open to sharing and all that, like, I don't enjoy this per se, but that comes with the job, right? And so how do you create that environment for other people? And so you want them to bring, you know, their true self to work to be able to get the most out of it. And that's a part of leadership. It's not about you. You know, it's about the people you pull together and getting them to work together in a way that there's value beyond the sum of the parts.
I mean, personally, I really applaud efforts people to be transparent and authentic and to be comfortable to be sharing their views.
Yeah.
I mean, someone can take your views to say, well, I'm not pushing for a career, it's God's calling, it's God's plan. I mean, someone can take that in a very negative way, can take that quote and make it sound as an irresponsible quote from a CEO. And I think it's just the opposite.
Yeah.
To be able to, if you're truly interested in what does that mean? What drives you? How do you go that brings a much greater understanding as opposed to looking for sound bites into proof point and maybe anti-faith. Again, just
no,
one example.
to your point, I agree. It's like, okay, saying, it's God's plan, and so, like, okay, let's just sit back and see how it works out. You know, like, it's like watching a movie or whatever. It's quite the, I mean, God has, you know, an incredibly high standard for each individual. And so, yeah, like I said, it's a paradox because it's also, okay, it's God's plan, but He's expecting you to try to do the best you can, make the right decisions, et cetera. And so it is very much then saying, okay, what do we need to do? What is the issue? What is the problem? What are we trying to accomplish? What are the alternatives? What are the pluses and minuses? How are we going to get this done, et cetera, you know, to be able to get to the right outcome. And there's no confusion with who we're doing it for, you know, in that context, right? It's Northern Trust in that case, right? And so, you know, my role and my colleagues, like, we all work for the same company. So what's best for the company, right? We have a purpose, and so we're trying to serve that purpose. Let's, you know, try to accomplish that.
I mean, the Bible also says you can't serve God and money, so somehow there's a pretty significant conflict, and I do not necessarily fully agree with that, but I'm sure you have many chances where you have business decisions to make, at least on surface, may seem to be contrary to what the values in the Bible are supposed to be, and also to make a quote-unquote profit-oriented decision.
Yeah.
Any examples that you can provide that was a quote-unquote win-win, and to confirm that people with values and faith are also terrific leaders, if you will, including the for-profit world?
Sure. So I would say for us, on the one hand, I'm going to say it's simple. On the other hand, it's a challenge, which is we are a fiduciary. So we are always trying to do what's best for the client. That's what the company was founded on. That's our strategy, you know, and that's what we do. We're also running a business. And so the struggle is always, not always, but the struggle over time is you want to make sure, okay, we're doing what's best for the client, but we also need to, make sure that we're operating a business that's profitable so that we have the ability to reinvest in new capabilities which are going to help those clients even more down the line. And candidly, we're generating value for our shareholders who have provided the capital so that then we're able to continue to have the company that they wanted to work with. So it's just understanding that all those pieces have to fit together. And like I said, on the one hand, you say, well, that's simple. On the other hand, there's like lots of individual decisions within that you have to make to say, okay, but what's the right thing by the client on this? But what also is something we can do that makes the whole operating model work.
Have you come across any areas of conflict in making decisions, or has that become such a big part of Northern that's very rarely have issues or hard decisions, if you will, on that front?
Yeah, I would say that the company has gone through time periods where, okay, there's a loss or something, and maybe because of the market, and frankly, Rick at the time, they decided we're going to make all the clients whole. That's going to cost us money now, but when you think about it longer term, it's going, by doing the right thing by the client, it's going to be that. We haven't had that specific type of situation since I've been there, but I would say it's more, you want to make all the right decisions along the line as opposed to allowing them to build up to be, I'll say, big, monumental, like, okay, it's going to be great for the clients or not great for the clients.
Thank you. I have so many other questions, including philanthropy, but I think I'm looking at the clock, but just simply to say thank you. I think you annually, Northern gives almost $20 million a year. I think it was $170 million in the last 10 years, more than 100,000 hours of community service every year. I know October is a big month of giving, so anyway, I just want to say, as a Chicagoan, thank you, and again, keep up with all that wonderful work which you do on principle number one, which is service. So anyway, I just simply want to say thank you. Again, I do want to provide time for the group for questions, maybe just in a little lightning round, just a couple of quick answers on, I already asked you how you met Claire, so I'm not going to ask you that one, but any unique character, any unique personality differences between your three daughters?
How much time do you have?
It's supposed to be a lightning round.
They could not be more different. I won't select out individual characteristics, but when people would say, you have three daughters, like, don't you want a little variety? Should you have a son? I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, they are so different. I would just say the greatest joy out of that is they're incredibly different. And through their lives and growing up, there's friction between them, and some get better, the fact that now as adults, they all obviously, say love each other and get along is, I'll give a quick story if I could, which is just, so the girls were all home for, the Christmas holiday. We did a number of things, but the last night, Claire and I said, like, well, why don't we go for a nice dinner? So we had, made reservations, this nice restaurant and all that. And so that was fine. And then our youngest daughter, Alexandra, who just got engaged a couple weekends ago,
Congrats.
so very excited about that, said on her own, she said, and afterwards we're going to go to this, this bar, together, Howling at the Moon, if anybody knows what that bar is. She loves that place, because it's one, they have kind of the dueling pianos, now it's a band, and you can sing songs, it's that type of place. And so, okay, great, we went there. And so, first of all, we had a ball, I'll say, from like 10 o'clock until midnight, as a family, like doing all this. And then, Claire and I, by the way, it was like a Wednesday night. I think it's a school night. And so I need to go. Like, it's time. Claire was past her bedtime as well. So we said, we're going to take off. And they said, no problem. We're going to hang out, together. They closed down the bar. And then I know, only because when I woke up the next morning, like, the kitchen's a mess. Like, they came back, raided the fridge, hung out until like 4 a.m, the three girls. And so when I, found out, all of this, I called Claire and I said, like, our job is done. The fact that they get along now and enjoy each other and want to do that,
Awesome.
like,
Awesome.
that's the greatest.
Yeah, as I think, our boys are 10 years older than yours on average. Yeah, it's all very different, but all great friends as well.
Yeah.
The new Pope.
Yeah, I think the best thing about it, I think, is the fact that even though he's from Chicago, for the most part, nobody knew him. Like, I didn't know him. Again, I'm very involved at the Archdiocese. I know a number of other people very deep in it. It wasn't like, oh, it's so-and-so who we all know, whatever. And my point is, this is somebody who is truly, all about service, all about being humble. And back to you look at that and you say, this is the way things are supposed to work. Maybe I'm wrong in this, but like, I can guarantee you, growing up, he was not like, I'm going to be the Pope. Because nobody with that in mind would say like, and here's the path I'm going to take. They would have taken a different path, but here's somebody who truly just followed, I'll say, God and his vocation, his calling. And in the end, he's in this position for all the right reasons. So I'm very excited about it for what it means for the Catholic Church.
From what I've read so far, he just seems to be the perfect guy for the perfect in the perfect time.
Yeah.
Favorite hobbies?
Well, I'm going to give two, because if not, then I'm not being authentic. So one is running, and you and I have talked. So I do run a lot. I am not an Ironman like this guy. So Mike humbles me with his stories and his accomplishments on that front. But for a lot of reasons, I do enjoy, say like long distance running and marathons up until very, very recently. The other is I play the drums. And I say that because somebody has a picture here, which please don't.
I saw that beforehand. Oh my God, can that be Mike?
Don't share that. But I played the drums growing up, and so it's just another, I'll say, interest that I've had and still have the opportunity. Even though we live in an apartment, there's a little room there, and with electric drums, which are not the same as Red, you can play in such a way that you're not waking up all the neighbors.
Last question. I do have a question coming up from Mimi Murley, but your views on Mother Teresa?
Yeah, very, very, I'll say powerful. One of the interesting things is that, just tying it back, John Wooden, who he would talk about being a disciple of Jesus Christ. And so that's who he said, the closest thing in my lifetime is Mother Teresa. So he had this admiration for it. And I think it's because of not only the values that she stood for, but it fits perfectly into this idea of, yes, God has a plan, but it's then like you have to go out and do it. And for her, she just went out and did this, and the impact for somebody who's, I don't take, I'll say, pride in being 6'5", but at 4'11", she did an incredible amount and so much more than people of a different build.
For full disclosure, we just came from a pilgrimage. Like Robbie and I came last night. Was Greece, 7 days. We could not make that. 11 days in Turkey, following St. Paul footsteps, if you will. And 4 days in my native Macedonia. And Mother Teresa was born in my hometown, Skopje. She spent a year in Ireland, and then the rest of her life in India. And there's a museum, and we tried to do a Eucharist most of the days. And we just did a Eucharist, I think it was on Tuesday. The second floor of the museum in Skopje was just magical. So anyway, that's why I mentioned Mother Teresa to you this morning. But if you have any questions, I'm going to start with the first one. Are you wearing a white socks or a Cubs hat? And the follow-up, with the challenges of the Catholic Church, how are you finding your work with the diocese, within the diocese?
Yeah. So on the first one, it would be a Cubs hat. So again, my dad was a North Sider, so that I'll say pretty easy. And then on the second, it is challenging, right? On a number of fronts. But back to this idea of like trying to follow the calling. So not just with, the Archdiocese, but all of the things that I'm involved with. I look at it as like an incredible privilege, and an obligation, right? So if I have this opportunity, if somebody's saying, hey, you could be a part of this organization and we think you can make an impact, then I feel like I need to do that. And so it's the same with the church. And, everything I talked in the beginning just about the vibrancy, of the church overall, and the change in faith trends and things like that. It's a challenge, not to mention, things that have happened within the church, historically, and dealing with those issues as well. It's a lot, but just because it's hard work doesn't mean you do it. Don't do it. It means you try to figure a way.
And just a personal perspective, I mean, so often evaluating, quote unquote, supposed Christians or church, I do think that's maybe too much of a shortcut and a convenient reason not to pursue faith yourself. Yes, again, if you, to an extent, you may not be pleased with some Christians or some churches, they're really, you're shortchanging yourself. If you do not truly look at the Word and so what does that mean for you, and what can you do versus, again, it's a simple, convenient reason not to pursue.
I've always, just on that point, it's always been about, in the way, again, that I was raised, your personal relationship with God and with Jesus Christ. And so that's the way I was raised, not you're a part of the church and it's everything the church, and then everything builds beyond that. And so even though you say, well, this happened and this was bad and the church did this and this is bad, so therefore, I guess that you're not a Christian then. And it's like, no, that's not the case. It starts with that personal relationship.
Actually, one of the questions really is, how do you define personal relationship with God? What's your definition of that?
Well, the way it is for me, at least, is at the core, I will say, I know myself, and everything obviously that goes through my mind and everything I think about. Jesus knows all of that as well. So it is complete transparency. And back to this idea of trying to be the best person I could be, there's no escaping it. So if it's a thought, then, Jesus knows that thought as well. And then everything else builds around it, I'll call it, in concentric circles, in such a way that it's trying to make sure that I'm trying to be aligned with what, Jesus wants me to be. And then outside of that, well, then I want my other relationships and what I do to be aligned with that as well. And that's what I'm always trying to, never achieving the perfect alignment, but always trying to, move towards it.
Perfect. Any questions from the group here? I know we're running on time, but I'm okay taking 5 extra minutes. I can call a few of you for questions. Timmy.
Thank you for being here. Thank you to both Mikes for being here and allowing me to be here too. Just curious, in regards to your faith, outside of your family maybe, who do you draw inspiration from in your faith, and maybe who are some of your current faith mentors?
Besides your wife.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I've had the opportunity, over my entire lifetime to have relationships with particular, religious people who have dedicated their lives, to, in this case, the Catholic Church. So, the first one, when I was in first grade, our teacher was Sister Sharon Marie. And so that was back at the time, the flying nun. She was called the singing nun. And just a wonderful person, and somebody who, I'll say, and was attracted to be able to kind of follow on what she was teaching. And then high school, a couple priests, from the high school. And I've been fortunate to develop a relationship, more recently with Father Jack Wall if you know Father Wall, who just a tremendous person. And so it is somebody who I'll say I admire, but also look to your point, for counsel on these types of, when I'm wrestling with something, if you will, and trying to find somebody who can be that type of, we'll call it like faith mentor. Sure.
I have another question from the audience. Mentoring. Mm-hmm. I know you do lots of mentoring, but maybe any description of your relationships with people at work or outside work, and how do you find mentoring as I would just call it as a ministry in many ways.
It is, and I would say I have been just an incredible beneficiary of phenomenal mentors. I mean, when I talk about, whatever I'm going to call it, like success or accomplishments I've achieved, over half of it has to do with other people, and mentors who, again, they saw more potential in me than I saw in myself. They're the ones that, I'll say, pushed me along when I need to be pushed, and I'll say, kept me in line when I needed to be kept in line. Certainly I talked about like my high school basketball coach, right? Yeah. I had my volleyball coach in college, but then in my professional life at Price Waterhouse, a couple people. Mm-hmm. I was incredibly fortunate at Merrill Lynch. There's a number of people who were true mentors, not just bosses. People like Jeff Neal and Chuck Lewis, Dan Bailey.
Jeff Neal was with Merrill Lynch?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Who did so much for me, not again like in the career, but like helping to develop me as a person. And then just because it is so important at Northern, and it's interesting because Bill Osborne was not at Northern Trust when I joined Northern Trust.
Great guy, yeah.
He was a mentor to me though for years before that, for no particular reason. And I would even go visit him on things that had nothing to do with Northern Trust. I visited him in his office in the Sears Tower, just to talk. And Bill just has a way, as we know, to, move you in the right direction and kind of push you along. And then, certainly Rick as well.
And how would you describe your mentoring style with Next Generation?
Yeah, it's interesting because I know that I use a lot of I'll call it like techniques that I have from others. So I'm more of a pusher with people as well as to so in other words, in fact, somebody said something the other day and it like really struck me. You can say, they said, I met with Mike and he wasn't that complimentary of me and he didn't try to really tell me how great I was and all this stuff. Like, is that why you came to talk to me? Because I thought you wanted me to be very direct and tell you how you could improve and, tell you about all the great things you're doing, but how you should think about this. And so I lean on the directness with that because I feel like that is the ultimate form of respect, right? Is being direct with somebody. As opposed to, I could tell you that your collar's sticking up, but I'm not going to. I'm going to let you go walk in there, with your collar turned up. The same thing. Please tell me.
And that's amazing. The smart ones will keep coming back.
Yeah.
Because if you're simply looking for compliments, you'll not get so. But Mike, thank you so much. I applaud your humanity, your faith, the service orientation, which Northern Trust embodies in totality. So, on behalf of Chicago and all your clients globally, I wish you continued success, and including the one Northern Trust, the goals of growth, resilience, and productivity. And we wish you well. And we always finish with Lord's Prayer, but let's give Mike a great applause. We always finish, and I think Father Luke had to go, so I'll start it. But our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom,
Power.
and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you all very much. Thanks.